specifically asked to unmute yourself. If you've not yet done so, please make sure that you identify yourself by the name and either the city or organization you represent. If you need assistance on how to do that, we can put instructions in the chat for you. Also, please remember that this webinar is a public space. It's open to all, and we are recording it. Questions from attendees will be held until the very end. We will prioritize questions from LOC members before we go out large. We will end promptly at 1 o'clock today. And as always, you can follow all of our legislative activities on our website at www.orcities.org. We've got a pretty heavy agenda today. We're going to cover a lot of topics. We'll start with our semiconductor package. We'll give an update on where things stand with enterprise zones. We'll discuss a mobile crisis line, public contracting, a recycling needs survey, cybersecurity, broadband, resilient efficient housing, resilient efficient buildings. We'll give an update on some housing legislations, and we'll finish with information on a Ways and Means Roadshow that's coming to areas near you shortly. So it's a long day. We'll do our best to get through to leave time for questions. And as always, feel free to drop stuff in the chat. We are monitoring it. We're going to start today with an update on semiconductors. We've talked a lot about semiconductors of late with each of you. Jim McCauley and Lindsay Tennis, both two lobbyists with our organization. Jim is our legislative director. Lindsay handles our tax and finance portfolio, have been tag teaming this particular proposal. Jim, can you tell us where things stand today? I believe it's in Senate Bill 4 where the package is presently listing, but where are we with the package? What's in it? What's not in it? And what do we need to know?
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Patty. Hello, everybody. So Senate Bill 4, as Patty mentioned, is the vehicle going forward for, I'll say, the first phase of this semiconductor package. The quick history here has been our effort to try to get the incentives that are critical for economic development built into the program. Unfortunately, that's going to be done in the second phase of this process. So what's in Senate Bill 4 at this point in time is $210 million. It's an allocation from the state, and that'll be going towards a range of different deliverables. We don't know how much yet, but this could be money for site readiness, which is what we're hoping for. That's going to be critical for development. There's going to be money allocated for workforce development, university structure, and things of that nature, trying to build up some of the semiconductor programs out there as well. The other component that is in Senate Bill 4 is the land use. I think everybody understands, I'll just say, the challenges that Oregon has with their current land use system. And in order to meet the type of timelines that we have for companies to apply and be successful getting grant money from the federal government within the CHIPS Act, that's going to have to be an accelerated process. Right now, there is, I'll just say, ongoing conversations on whether this is going to be straight out a executive order from the governor, or if they are physically going to name sites in that piece of legislation. So there's still some fine tuning and some agreements that need to be made around the table. They want to make this a bipartisan effort, and that's really where kind of the politics are going to fall in over the next 48 hours. So the plan is Senate Bill 4 will move out of committee Monday evening, and will in all likelihood be at least in one of the chambers by the end of the week, possibly both, but more realistically just one. And we'll be gearing up for really the second phase of this, which is really where Lindsay's work has been focused on, and that's the incentive packages that will be coming forward. So we're about there. I think I've described this before as we're kind of a car assembly process right now. And we've got a chassis of a car, we've got square wheels, but we need an engine. We need basically everything else that's going to make that car go through the process, or make sure this is going to be a competitive package and stuff in comparison to the other states. So with that, I'll let maybe have Lindsay kind of build on some of the economic incentive piece of this, which is really on the E-zone. So go ahead, Lindsay.
Great, thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. So I don't have a lot to update so far on the enterprise zone piece of it. As we've said before, extending enterprise zones and then gain share as part of the strategic investment program and industrial site readiness were all recommendations that came out of the task force that worked on the semiconductor package that was convened by previous Governor Kate Brown. So that's, really where we come into the conversation. As I've said before, we will keep working on enterprise zones, whether or not they're included in a semiconductor package or not. There are some bills that make modifications to the enterprise zone program, and we are kind of watching all of that very closely to make sure that those incentives are not weakened as a tool for local government. Because as you all know, our economic development strategy as a state really relies on local governments to attract business and abate property taxes, which is, the biggest source of revenue for cities. So, that's the message that we are trying to get across, is that, it's a local discretionary tool, and that, cities wouldn't give up their property tax unless there was a very big return on investment to those programs. And then to that note, Mayor Beebe of Prineville and Mayor McGriff of Oregon City published a great op-ed in the Oregonian this week that advocated for extending enterprise zones and kind of highlighting the impact of the tool. So thank you, mayors, for doing that. I will drop that link in the chat. And then Jim and I also have a template that other cities can use to write op-eds to highlight enterprise zones. And we're really looking for cities that want to help place op-eds in regional newspapers across the state. So, the more widespread impact we get in regional papers, that will catch the attention of legislators. And it's, something that we can use to advocate for in the building. And as we've talked about before, the more personal stories we have about enterprise zones and the extra community benefits that come from them beyond the job and wage growth, the better tools that we have to talk about these programs in the building. So if you're interested in sponsoring an op-ed to talk about enterprise zones, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is there any areas in particular that would be helpful for op-eds that you're particularly interested in seeing?
I think if we could, if we could get one place in the Register Guard in Lane County, that would be great. And then Corvallis area, that would also be great.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. If you don't mind sticking with us though, Lindsay, I believe you have House Bill 2757 in your portfolio, which I understand is a bill that's going to create a new suicide prevention and behavioral health crisis hotline. What can you tell us about that bill and how it could potentially impact our members?
Yeah, thank you. So the line itself exists. This is 988 that was created by the FCC. And I think it became fully functional in June of last year. So the idea was to sort of consolidate different national hotline and suicide and behavioral health crisis lines into one easy 3-digit number, the way that we all know that 911 is used for emergencies. Now we have 988, which is used for mental health crises and suicide. And, we commonly know of suicide lines, but it really does sort of encapsulate the full gamut of behavioral health crisis services. And so what this bill does is adds a new telecom tax, the same way that we fund 911, to fund 988 services. So the goal is to kind of build out a similar structure, the way that we have to 911, to help fund these services. And of course, cities, whether or not they have a standing mobile crisis program, the way that Eugene has Cahoots or Portland has the Portland Street Response, sort of take on the cost of these services anyway. So we have been watching it. The other thing about this bill is it does have a local preemption on a telecoms tax. So the -2 amendment, which should pass next week, preempts local governments from adding on an additional telecoms tax to fund 988. And so obviously we're watching that. So far we have not taken a position on the bill. because, it has increased funding for behavioral health services, which will help cities because they're already paying for that anyway, but has a local preemption, which we don't like, and are obviously concerned anytime we see a local preemption in a bill. The bill also has a provision that cities that run their own mobile crisis programs enter into an MOU with the county, because behavioral health services are statutorily a county responsibility. That cities enter an MOU with the county that specifies jurisdictional responsibilities, provides that the city complies with OHA rules, and then addresses the funding responsibilities of community mental health providers. And I will see Scott, Nolan, or Ariel, do you have anything else to add here? This issue touches just about all of our portfolio areas.
I have a question.
Oh, Mayor Clark, we're going to hold questions till the end, but I've got a note to come back to at the very end. Scott, but you unmuted yourself.
I did. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. I think when we talk to our police chiefs, again, Scott Winkles, I'm among other things, public safety lobbyist. The chiefs are very supportive of this program going forward. I think there's some questions obviously about whether city county overlap in the services provided. I think for most of the membership, it's just the desire is that the service simply be provided, and that there's a means other than law enforcement to deal with people who are in a behavioral health crisis and can proactively work with people to get them into the right services they need. This has been a long time coming, so a huge step forward, even though we clearly have lots of details to work out.
Thanks, Scott. And then the other thing I will note here is because the bill has a new tax, it does require 3/5 of the legislature to vote yes for it to pass. And that is always a big hurdle for the legislature to, come together with 3/5 of the body to pass a new tax.
Thank you, Lindsay. And there was a question in the chat. It's been answered by another member, but just to repeat, the mobile crisis line is coming under House Bill 2757, correct?
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you. And Scott, I know you jumped in to provide some additional clarity on the police chief's perspective, but I'm going to ask you to stay online and on camera. We're going to pivot and talk about how Senate Bill 850, which deals with public contracting. I know you've updated us before on this bill and its potential impact for cities, particularly on public procurement projects that are $750,000 or more. But what can you update us on this week? What's happening with that bill? Where are we looking in terms of movement on it? What do our cities need to know?
So thank you, Patty. Yeah, Senate Bill 850. I know we've talked about this bill a few times on this call before, and we're going to keep talking about it until it's put to rest, as it is a significant threat to our ability to implement public improvements. Again, the bill requires either a project labor agreement. Well, as written, it requires the PLA. There's an amendment in the work, the -2s, would require either a PLA project labor agreement, which is it's a unique type of collective bargaining agreement to construction projects, or that the contractor meet a certain set of standards in regards to benefits, pay, apprenticeship utilization. I think the bill had a hearing this week. The league testified in opposition. If the city were to choose either option, we believe that there's a potential for a legal challenge or a bid protest to the contract award, which would delay the project. It will also add costs. The bill, the crux of our testimony was that the bill will delay projects and is unnecessary. If you remember, in the 21 session, the legislature changed the prevailing wage calculation to increase those wages across the state, and which would also increase the fringe benefit rate. there simply aren't enough union contractors to fill the demand we need. And if we look at a scenario where we're trying to build 36,000 units of housing in the course of the next year, we're going to have to get infrastructure to those new projects very, very quickly. When you're in a state of a crisis or you're in a state of an emergency, which we are, we're in a declared emergency in some areas in regards to houselessness and homelessness. We typically streamline the contracting process. We don't add complications to it, which is what this bill would do. There's a bulletin article on this. If you haven't talked to your legislators on this one, particularly your senators, I encourage you to do so post haste. We would like to keep this bill from surviving past the work session scheduling deadline, which is a week from today. If Wilsonville and Oregon City, if you're on the call, I think your senators, Meek and Rogers, are going to be pivotal in this conversation.
Scott, is there anybody else besides those two that you need assistance from the membership on?
Those are the two we'd like to focus on. I think if Senator Patterson, of course, would be, she's on the committee, but all senators should receive a touch on this one.
Thank you, Scott. And you'll have your email information in the chat if people need assistance on what they should be specifically contacting the legislature. Awesome. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break from actual legislation, and I'm going to ask Jim McCauley just to give everybody a friendly reminder on some surveys that need to be completed to try and secure some recycling funding that might be available to cities. Jim's our legislative director. This isn't typically his portfolio. We usually rely on Michael Martin, but Michael's had to step away unexpectedly. So Jim's going to give us a quick update really quickly on this. Jim?
Great. Thank you. Just pulling it up. Michael couldn't join us today, but this is some survey work that we are doing jointly with DEQ. It's effectively Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act that took effect back in January of 22. So this is the follow-up. So we've got 99 cities so far that have responded to the survey. Michael has this updated in the bulletin as well. It's really important to get as many cities on board as possible with filling out the survey information because in order to possibly qualify for some of the funding, that needs assessment has to be completed. It's going to be in place or be active until April 14th. So a couple of tips from Michael in terms of filling out this needs assessment, and feel free to reach out to him directly, is meet with your service providers before completing the survey to get additional ideas of how or what is needed in your community. Consider meeting with your county and other nearby communities to coordinate and share information. And then 3, up until April 14th, again, your survey response can actually be changed. So if you are submitting something and have more information that comes up before that deadline on the 14th, you've got the ability to complete the data and effectively make sure everything in there is accurate. So this essentially is just a reminder for anybody who hasn't filled this out. Make sure you do so you can at least get in the queue for potentially qualifying for some funding.
Thanks, Jim. And since Michael's not here, do you mind dropping his contact information in the chat for people in case they need to follow up?
Not a problem.
Thank you. Okay, so pivoting away from reminders and going back to actual pieces of legislation, because I think that's the primary reason you all are on the call. I'm going to ask our lobbyist, Nolan Plesha, if he can turn his video camera on. Nolan handles a lot of our portfolio, telecom, broadband, energy, but today we're going to ask him to speak at least first about cybersecurity. Nolan, specifically, if you can give an update on House Bill 2806 and 2490, which are related to cybersecurity, but I do think intersect with Oregon's public meetings law and its public records law. So if you can give us an update on those two House bills and how they have the potential to impact and benefit cities, I think they'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And like you mentioned, yes, there is that intersection. So I've been working with Scott Winkles on these as well to ensure that we are both aligned. We mainly wanted to flag these two bills that we think are really important for our members. House Bill 2490 had its first public hearing this week in the House Energy or Emergency Management, General Government and Veterans Committee. We were asking for a work session after that public hearing, but one was actually just scheduled this morning, which is really great news. House Bill 2490 exempts from disclosure certain documents by public agencies related to cybersecurity. These would include contractual records, insurance records, documents, and correspondence that set forth cybersecurity specifications, insurance applications, contracts, plans, and coverage details. These are things that we think are highly sensitive and really do not belong in the public eye. Especially because we know there are many bad actors out there. The second bill that LOC is asking the same committee to advance to the House floor is House Bill 2806. The committee held its first hearing on this bill back on February 14th. House Bill 2806 with the -2 amendments allows governing bodies to meet in executive sessions to discuss cybersecurity infrastructure and cyber threats. Additionally, it extends executive sessions to consider matters relating to the safety of a governing body, staff, and volunteers, and to the security of a public body's facilities and meeting spaces. Both of these are good bills, and we are encouraging the committee to move on both of them and send them to the Senate. Like I said, House Bill 2490 is on the right path. So we're really now just focusing on House Bill 2806 to ensure that it gets a work session as well.
Thank you, Nolan. Is there anything that you need from the members to ensure that work session happens for House Bill 2806?
I think we are in pretty good place. But if any members have a representative that serves on the committee for the House Emergency Management, General Government, and Veterans Committee, if you could reach out to those members and just encourage them to support and schedule a work session for House Bill 2806. That would be great.
And Nolan, can you drop a link to who sits on that committee into the chat in case people don't readily know where their representative sits?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And is it fair to say that when Jamie Pierce and I, our general counsel, and I joke that you don't want to tell the bad guys how we keep things safe, this would be an expansion of that in public records and public meetings?
Absolutely. And that's really the intent of both of these bills. We know some cities have actually received public records requests relating to cybersecurity. There has been the general belief that they don't have to share that information, but it hasn't been clear in statute. So cities end up having to heavily redact that information. For general media, we generally feel that they're not going to put out any information that's going to harm cities. But when there is a public records request, as you all know, we can't necessarily discriminate between someone we believe is going to be a good actor and bad actor. In many cases, we don't know, as well as bad actors just paying attention to what's out there. It could allow them to find some loopholes that could impact cities.
Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate it. And just in case you're not tracking it, Eric Mitten, also attorney by trade like myself, said, thanks for pushing this forward. It's a big deal for cities. It certainly is. I'm not going to let you go away yet, though, Nolan, since you handle our broadband portfolio, you're going to have to stick on with us for a little bit. In previous webinars, you've given us updates on House Bill 3201 and its potential to provide cities with access to needed funds for broadband infrastructure. Where do things stand with that bill today? What do our members need to know?
Well, the good news is the bill's moving along pretty well. Opponents have continued to make concessions, although we're very much still holding the line. We had our final public hearing on the House side yesterday. And what we are asking now is, again, for LOC members to contact their representatives in the House and ask them to support House Bill 3201 with the -1 and -2 amendments. Specifically, if LOC members have a representative that serves on the House Economic Development and Small Business Committee, we are really asking you to contact your representative and ask them to support House Bill 3201 with the -1 and -2 amendments. Cities whose members are on that committee are listed on today's broadband bulletin. So please contact them by email or phone as soon as possible. And when I'm done talking about this, I will also put a link to that committee and the representatives in the chat, so you can look at that as well. The LOC is supporting the -1 and -2 amendments. The -1 amendment clarifies the statute, clarifies in statute that the use of the Administrative Procedures Act, which holds the Oregon Broadband Office and the Oregon Business Development Department accountable to follow all the rules and procedures that are laid out for the broadband grant process. The -2 amendment guarantees a transparent challenge process is created for the grant programs. This amendment is purposely not prescriptive because the ARPA and BEAD funding have separate challenge processes. One process cannot be put into statute without affecting its alignment with the other process. The -2 ensures a process is created, but can be adapted to align with each funding source. There are additional talking points that you can use in today's bulletin. Of course, please feel free to reach out to me as well if you have any questions or are looking for advice on how to talk with your representative. As we've mentioned before, our biggest concern is leaving any funding on the table. We know that if there's any conflicts in Oregon statute with the federal guidance, we may not receive all those funds, or in some cases, we may not even have time to spend those funds due to how statute requires us to spend the money. So we are really focused on trying to ensure this fund is flexible, ensuring that the funds also go to our unserved, underserved, and historically disadvantaged communities. But again, we are really aiming to maximize as much of the federal funding because there is up to $700 million at stake here.
Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate the update. And I'm going to stick with you one last time before we give you a break. What I want is to ask you to give us an update on 4 specific bills, which sounds like a lot, but I think they're all actually related to the same thing, which is a request that the Department of Consumer and Business Services begin studying how we can build resiliency into our actual buildings. It's my understanding that all 4 bills are Senate bills, specifically Senate Bill 868, 869, 870, and 871. What, if anything, can you tell us about these particular bills and the likelihood they will have on impacting our cities?
Yes, I will do my best. So quick background. In the 2022 short session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 1518, which created a joint task force on resilient and efficient buildings. The aim of the task force was to identify and evaluate policies related to building codes and decarbonization for new and existing buildings to meet the state's greenhouse gas emissions reductions goal, while maximizing additional benefits like increasing energy efficiency, improving climate resilience, public health and air quality, and reducing the percentage of energy costs on households. Mayor Lucy Venus of Eugene was the LOC's representative on the task force and has done an amazing job representing the league and its members. As mentioned, so the task force completed its work in December, and the co-chairs created 4 bills, Senate Bill 868, 869, 870, and 871. Right now, each of the bills are a placeholder, but the LOC has received markups for 3 of these bills and is awaiting the 4th one. In addition, and most critical for us right now, we have been told that an informational hearing for all of the bills will be held next Tuesday, March 14th in the Senate Energy and Environment Committee at 1 p.m. A public hearing is expected next Thursday, March 16th in the same committee, also at 1 p.m. And we are expecting these bills to potentially move really quickly. You can read more detail about each of them in today's bulletin, but I'm going to give you a quick highlight for each of them. So first, Senate Bill 868, which is known as the Healthy Heating and Cooling for All. This bill aligns energy efficiency programs with state climate goals, sets a heat pump target for the state, supports workforce development, and improves navigation of federal and state incentives for energy efficiency and retrofits of homes and businesses. The LOC is not ready to take a position on this bill yet. From what we know and see right now, this bill seems to not be as much of a concern and may provide good benefits and incentives to Oregonians. However, the devil's in the details, and we are still trying to comb through the markup and see what final language is submitted before we take a position. The second bill, Senate Bill 869, is known as Build Smart from the Start. This bill would ensure new buildings in Oregon are constructed using energy efficient standards and are more resilient to climate impacts. We have many initial concerns with this concept and its potential impact to development. Again, we are waiting to see final language before determining a position, but we are voicing our initial concerns based on what we do know of the concept. The third bill, Senate Bill 870, is known as Building Performance Standards. This bill aims to establish building performance standards for large commercial buildings to reduce their energy use and climate emissions over time. Similar to Senate Bill 870, the LOC has a number of concerns with the initial markup we have seen. The bill is currently requiring energy performance standards for all existing large commercial buildings larger than 35,000 square feet, and will require them to meet energy performance standards over time. While it's modeled after the Washington state legislation, as currently drafted in the markup, the square footage for commercial buildings changes from the Washington standard of 50,000 square feet to 35,000 square feet. This will include state and local government buildings that meet the size threshold, potentially creating an unfunded mandate for cities. We have also been advised that some exemptions are coming for some industry sectors and schools, but this may not include local government buildings. We're going to keep a close eye on this concept and continue to raise the concerns regarding possible impacts to development to cities and their budgets. The last bill is Senate Bill 871, called Smart State Buildings. This is the one we do not have a markup on, so we have not seen any language for this bill. But what we do know is that it seeks to remove barriers to accelerate energy retrofits and upgrades in state buildings. Again, we have not taken a position on this bill yet. At first glance, it does seem to focus on the state, and if so, we'll most likely not take a position or remain neutral. However, still remaining cautiously optimistic, again, because we have not received a markup draft for this bill and cannot verify the details. And the one pager I do have does reference public bodies. And again, if that's not clarified at state public bodies, this could have an impact on cities as well. We'll continue to monitor the progress for each of these bills, with deadlines to post work sessions and move bills out of the first chambers fast approaching. It's unclear what will happen with them, so any action will move quickly, and we'll make sure to respond as accordingly as needed.
Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate the update. We'll give you a little break before we get to the Q&A section. We're going to pivot now. This will be the last major substantive discussion before we go into Q&A. We're going to end our talk today with some updates related to housing. We've been talking a lot about housing this session, and we're going to continue talking about it. Ariel Nelson, who just popped up on your screen, is our lobbyist who has maybe the privilege to handle our land use, housing, and homelessness portfolio. Ariel, you've been working really hard this session on a whole host of bills, particularly given the need from the legislature and the governor's office to push things through in the first 60 days. What can you tell us on some of those packages? What I want to do is take a quick pause. For those of you who read our reminder updates, we did have an incorrect bill number cited in that. So if you were writing it down and trying to figure out where things are, you could have been confused. Ariel's going to update us today on House Bill 2001 and House Bill 5019. The House Bill 5019 had been incorrectly referenced as House Bill 3019 in some of our advertising materials today, so we did want to make sure that's clear. But Ariel, if you can talk to us about what's going on with House Bill 2001 and 5019 related to that housing package, and then maybe wind up your presentation today on House Bill 3174, which is a bill that I know you work closely to develop in partnership with Association of Oregon Counties on giving some local development capacity to cities and counties across the state.
Sure. Thank you, Patty. So I have a quick update on the 60-day housing package, and I put the link to the two bills that make that up in the chat. So that's House Bill 2001 as it's been amended, and House Bill 5019 as it's been amended. Those two bills are known as the 60-day housing package, and they received approval. They were in the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Transportation and Economic Development, earlier this week. And then just this morning, the full Ways and Means Committee met and did advance both those bills forward with bipartisan support. So that means that they'll be heading first to the House floor and then to the Senate floor for final package. As a reminder, that 60-day housing package between the two bills includes the following: 33.6 million to prevent homelessness statewide. This is in support of the governor's emergency declaration and emergency response plan on homelessness. So that's prevention, emergency rent assistance prevention that will go through the community action agencies. And then there's 85.2 million for rehousing people experiencing homelessness and expanding shelter capacity in the declared emergency areas in her emergency declaration. 27.4 million for rehousing people experiencing homelessness and expanding shelter capacity in the remainder of the states. That's 26 counties and 157 cities that make up the balance of state rural Oregon continuum of care. And that was a piece that Representative Gomberg and some others in the legislature championed. It was really important to make sure that this 60-day package and initial emergency funds recognize the whole state. That package also includes $5 million for federally recognized tribes to address homelessness needs among tribal members statewide, $3.9 million for emergency management response between Oregon Housing Community Services and the Oregon Department of Emergency Management. This is the work they're doing directly in those declared emergency areas. And then in addition to that, these were pieces that the legislature added. It's $25 million for programs supporting unhoused youth. The governor's emergency declaration was based on the point in time count, which does not recognize unhoused youth. So it was really important to have those programs funded. $20 million for modular home production to help more rapidly deploy another type of affordable housing. There's $3 million in a revolving loan fund to incentivize housing developments with pre-development loans for moderate income housing, and $5 million to improve on-site workforce housing for agricultural workers. And then there's a policy piece, which is a compromise between tenant advocates and the three main landlord associations, providing renters faced with eviction for non-payment with more time to access rental assistance and other services to help them stay in their homes. So that proposal, that piece of the bill, lengthens the eviction notice timeline from 72 hours to 10 days and includes a right of redemption. And then the piece that we were the most focused on at LOC was the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which was originally introduced as House Bill 2889, is included in that package. You'll find the substance and policy of that bill in House Bill 2001, as well as funding to support the implementation. And that's funding for both staff and time at DLCD for the rulemaking that needs to take place in the next biennium. And it also includes, very importantly, funding for local government technical assistance grants. That's grants specifically from DLCD directly to cities to implement the pre-existing requirements for housing needs analyses and housing production strategy that the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is now building off of. So those are moving along. The other piece to know about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is that we are still working with partners on getting some technical fixes ironed out because this policy bill moves so quickly. There were a number of things that just need to be cleaned up in statute so that the department can actually rulemaking efficiently and accurately and in support of the intent that we negotiated. So there's some incorrect statutory references. There's some confusion around some implementation timelines for cities. Those are some things that we will be looking to get worked out this session in advance of rulemaking.
Thanks, Ariel. I appreciate it. And where do we stand with 3174?
3174, I have a great update on that one, a positive update. So this is a bill that the LOC worked on with our partners at Association of Oregon Counties. It started as a conversation, a deep dive into looking at the barriers to development this summer and fall. And it resulted in the bill, which had a public hearing on Thursday morning. And we had a really amazing public hearing with a great showing of stories from around the state, from both counties and cities, about the deep need for capacity and how capacity is one of the #1 barriers to producing needed housing. So this is a 3-part bill that really gets at, first, it would provide regional development capacity through our partners at the councils of state government or councils of government and economic development districts, $5 million to support a variety of grant writing, grant management, technical assistance, applying for infrastructure resources, housing resources, attracting developers. That's the first part of the bill that goes statewide, supporting cities and counties specifically. The second part of the bill recognizes a figure that the state economists came up with, that there's a shortage of 400 to 500 local permit level, technician review level staff to actually review and process housing development applications. So it would be funding, direct funding to support the staffing needed for that. And then the third part of the bill is an education curriculum for local land use decision makers. So that's your planning commissioners, city councilors, county commissioners. This would be a position that would live at the LOC, but work in close coordination with the AOC and with DLCD to develop an ongoing curriculum and get out around the state to train those members. So I want to just give a huge thank you to Mayor Rod Cross and a number of city planning directors, as well as our partners at the counties who testified in support for this bill. We had some really great on the ground stories of the need and of what these funds would mean.
And what's the next step with that piece of legislation, Ariel? Do we know yet?
So the next step is, we had originally drafted this bill where the first section was going to establish 12 regional housing coordinators. The path forward for that was a little unclear. And because we had this other ask out there with the COGS and the EDDs, we didn't want them to compete against each other. And the 5 million was more than what we were originally asking for. And they were thrilled to join forces with us and have a bill. We just felt like it was stronger together. So we're making a quick amendment that's in the works right now to codify that into the bill. And then we hope this will be scheduled for a work session, meaning a vote very soon. There is a important deadline, legislative deadline coming up, March 17th. Every bill has to at least be scheduled or posted for a work session on the docket by then to be remain alive and be able to move forward this session, unless they're in one of the special committees that aren't subject to the deadlines, that being the Rules Committee or the Revenue Committee's Ways and Means. So we'll be looking to have it scheduled before then, getting the amendment ready to then be ready for a vote out of committee. From there, because it is quite a large budget ask, it will go to the Ways and Means Committee. There's usually a bit of a delay while it hangs out there for other policy bills to move forward. And there may be some good or bad opportunity to negotiate in amongst there, and those dollar amounts may change, but I think we have some good momentum with this. And there was also some really great statements made by some of our legislators in that committee. Representative Helm really kicked things off, noting that our property tax system is really, I think he said, it puts cities and counties in a double bind. So it was really great to hear recognition of that. And former Mayor Gamba, Representative Gamba, was emphatically nodding his head. For our counselor Representative Anessa Hartman also nodding. There's a lot of good support from the dais there, and just a recognition of what you all are facing, trying to do everything you can on housing development.
Thank you, Ariel. We appreciate your work on that one. It's also nice to know it's not always bad news coming out of the housing land use portfolio. We're going to finish our substantive update today with just a quick update from Legislative Director Jim McCauley. He's got some information on a roadshow coming to you from Ways and Means. Jim, can you tell us what a roadshow even means for that committee, where we can expect to see it, and how our members can participate in it if they'd like to do so?
Yeah, definitely. So this is actually a good follow-up to part of the end of Ariel's conversation in terms of the budgeting process and stuff that's going forward. So typically every full session, the Ways and Means Committee, which is really the legislative budget arm, they're the ones that develop the budget. They'll take into account what the governor has put together, and then effectively will put in their own priorities and things of that nature. So there's the opportunity, just like every other committee process, to influence what those priorities are. The league will develop a set of priorities that we will submit into the process here in a couple of weeks. And those will all be in alignment with where our priorities are that we went into this session with. So for everybody else on this call, this is your opportunity to take advantage of this roadshow. It effectively is a committee hearing process that's not too different from what's in place in Salem, but they bring it out to the state. So they can't get to every single community that's out there, but the ones that they are going to be visiting give a little bit of a flavor for at least trying to move the bar a bit beyond a urban center. So I'll give you the dates, and we'll be following this up, of course, with a bulletin article next week. So the first one starts April 8th That'll be in Portland from 10 a.m. to noon. I don't have a location yet, but again, like I said, we'll get this in the bulletin. Friday, April 14th, they'll be in Newport from 5 to 7 p.m. Friday, April 21st, they'll be in Roseburg from 5 to 7 p.m. And then Friday, April 28th, they'll be in Ontario from 5 to 7 p.m. So a little bit of a mix in terms of regional areas, but again, this gives you a opportunity to engage with these legislators directly in your community. And as we've described before, and for anybody who's had a chance to go to the annual meeting or be part of our City Day at the Capitol, we really tried to stress a lot of education on budget requests for those of you who might have some specific project in your own community. So this is a way to follow up with some of that work and engage with your legislators.
Thanks, Jim. And just because in case we do have people on the phone who don't readily or regularly read the bulletin, can you drop the locations and dates in the chat so people have it if that's possible?
I will do. Yeah, I've got the dates but I've just got city locations. I don't have physical addresses or anything of that nature at that time, but yeah, I'll drop that.
Thank you, Jim. So that concludes our overall legislative update today. So we're ready to take questions from anybody who has them. I do have two that I've already seen and I will call on them first. But in the meantime, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Also feel free to drop it in the chat. Please know that we do ask everybody to limit themselves to just one question. This is an opportunity also for questions, not necessarily comments. We will start with our current city officials first. We'll work through city members before we go out to the general public and other representatives. So Mayor Clark, if you're still on the line, I know you had a question and your hand popped up when we were talking about the 988 mobile crisis line. So I'm going to assume that's what it was, but no matter what, your hand was up first if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Patty. Very much support the establishment of better access to suicide prevention, and the hotline makes a lot of sense. But what got my attention when I heard the phrase like 911, that turned into an unfunded mandate that now comes out of our city general fund for the balance of what is not covered in the telecom tax that is collected for 911. And the state then began sweeping the interest gathered on the funds collected and put it into OEM rather than against the costs that cities have been incurring. So if it is going to be like 911 in that regard, where are the funds going to come from to fund it? Anything above and beyond what the telecom tax collects? Because we don't have it in our budget, even though we love to support this, but we got to find another mechanism other than the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I don't know, is that Lindsay or Scott? I know you both have been working on this bill, so whoever unmutes first can go ahead and answer. How's that?
I will take a stab at that one. The 988, the statutory requirement for counties to provide that service already exists, and it's been an unfunded mandate for them for time and for, I would want to say, about 4 years. So there's no obligation for a city to really do anything in this space for us. And so if anything, it's the money is actually alleviating an existing unfunded mandate on our county partners.
So if people call from a jurisdiction, they won't be tallying how many come from a city versus a county like they do with 911, and then we get the bill.
No, Mayor, there will be, there's no, this is an exclusively account. This is statutorily as of right now, and barring an MOU that a city would voluntarily engage in, there would be no obligation on the city to provide this, to do anything here.
Okay, but it will help our counties provide the service.
Yes.
Lindsay, do you have anything you need to add?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that, yeah, it is statutorily a county responsibility. In the absence of funding, some cities have taken it upon themselves to set up these programs. And so, we're hoping that if this passes and there's now a stable revenue source for this service, that it can alleviate some of the services that cities have already been providing.
Thank you. Thank you both, Lindsay and Scott, and for the question, Mayor Clark. As always, it's a good one. We did have a question in the chat from City Manager Aaron Palmquist from the City of Oregon. Ariel, I believe it's a question for you. He's asking for an update on where things stand with the Oregon Mayors Association Homelessness Task Force funding request. Quickly, that was a request for direct and annual funding to each city in Oregon to help them in their homelessness response and prevention efforts. Ariel, where are we standing on that right now?
Thanks for the question, Aaron. So I'll be honest, it's a tough road ahead on this one. We're focused on the long-term budget, and that's largely through the Oregon Housing and Community Services budget is where the bulk of the funding around homelessness is going to go. And so we're still pursuing conversations with the agency, with the governor's office about, and the legislature about direct funding to cities, recognizing the roles of cities right now on, operating on the front lines of homelessness and where the gaps are in the current system. So this is where it's still really important to keep the momentum going with your legislators and ask them to be championing this ask and making this ask and bringing this up in their caucus conversations and their committee conversations and their conversations with legislative leadership. That's how we're going to make headway on this.
Thank you, Ariel. I appreciate it. And I always like this quote. I know you and I have both written it down since we heard it, but to give credit to Mayor Sawyer of Newport, this is one of those situations and proposals where we need to be patient, persistent, and keep on pestering. Mayor Beatty of Milwaukee, you have your hand raised with a question. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, we'll do our best to get you the answer that you need.
Great. Thank you very much. Following HB 2001 has been a difficult job. It's been a moving target. And I wondered if there's anything that breaks down what's actually in the engrossed bill. Some of the things I've been hearing over the last week or two have been very concerning about restricting the approach to variances, about potentially letting people somehow trump the zoning and build housing in commercial districts, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell me how much of that stuff made it, or can you tell me where I can find a breakdown?
It's a great question. So we had been promised a breakdown from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I don't think the legislature has released that yet, but I can assure you that those really concerning pieces around variances, around zoning, those are not in the version of 2001 that is passing. Some of those were suggested or introduced as amendments to 2001. They did not move forward. It's just the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program as built into the existing requirements for housing production strategies for updating housing capacity analyses. So those other pieces are still out there. They're introduced into other bills. You'll be hearing more about them from me, and we'll probably be going to be having to engage on those. It's really important for you to be having conversations with your legislators about the challenges of those bills. I can get you some write-ups on that, Mayor. So know that, we still have some work to do on those, but they're not moving forward in this expedited package in any way.
Thank you, Ariel. And thank you, Mayor Beatty, for asking the question. I don't think it's a question. Joe, I do see your hand up, but I have city members still in front of you, so I'm not ignoring you. We do have I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but Brandon Dross from the city of Lafayette is referring to House Bill 3115 and talking about local data gathering and how it might allow us to be more proactive regarding this bill as opposed to waiting and seeing. I'm not entirely sure who has House Bill 3115. Anybody want to, Jim, you're shaking your head like, as Ariel's at you?
Patty, I looked that one up and I'm wondering if he's talking about the previous bill that we've trained on, because the current 3115 in this session looks like it's related to community colleges.
So Brandon, if you want to unmute and clarify, I did see you put your camera on. It might be helpful. I just want to make sure we get you what you need before we call today.
Oh, no, sorry. The homelessness mandate for July 1. So I guess 2021, 3115. We kind of talked about it last night, and I was told, reach out to some of your peers, and I just don't know where we're at here in Yamhill, how important it is. But just knowing the encroachment of some of the bigger cities, I think if a lot of us fail to address it now, we're going to be playing catch up later on. And that I think a lot of us need to really look at our ordinances because I think you're going to have the ALCUs and all the different watchdog groups watching all these small cities to see what they do. And I have a feeling that a lot of us are going to get some type of litigation because we're not prepared for this. Sorry.
No, that's a good question, Brandon. Ariel, I don't know if you want to touch on that or if you need me with any assistance and follow up on what cities should be doing, but I'll let you go first because I know you ran point on that bill.
Thanks, Betty. I'm happy to let you jump in, but as you may know, Brendan, or for folks on the call, the league did publish a legal resource guide on this and put on several workshops around the state on best practices. Essentially, our strong recommendation and encouragement is for all cities to review all of your ordinances and procedures that may regulate those type of camping activities. And determine whether or not you do need to update your ordinance. It is the measure is largely untested, as you know. The effective date is in July, so we will be monitoring that closely and working with cities on next steps. I don't know, Patty, if you have anything to add to that.
The only thing I would add is if you are a city who has not yet reviewed your ordinances relating to whether or not people sit, sleep, lie, or take precautions to keep themselves warm and dry from the elements yet, and you regulate those or you want to regulate those, you do have to worry about that July 1 deadline. The second thing that you may not necessarily know is that City County Insurance Services is providing assistance to cities who are working on updating their ordinances. That additional legal advice from City County Insurance is free of charge. If you are a city who is looking for information or assistance on your ordinance, he's going to hate me for doing this in a meeting with over 100 people online, but the person you want to talk to at City County Insurance is their general counsel, Kirk Mylander. He can get you in touch with the attorney they've contracted with who can provide some assistance, but you should definitely be focusing on that and know that there is assistance from CIS. And Ariel mentioned we do have that housing guide that we can also use as a reference point to start on this project. I hope that gives you some clarification, Brandon, and others on the call who might have questions. Joe, I see your hand. If you can ask your question quickly, we are about running out of time. How can we help today?
My question is, where does the league stand on the cap and trade bills for HB 2685 and 3003?
Jim, who's handling those bills? Is that
It deals with logging and fire. It stems out of SB 762.
Thank you, Joe. Jim, do we know who's tracking that, or do we need to get back with everybody?
I'll need to get back with everybody. It'd probably be the best thing to do because they're not currently on anybody's tracking list on this thing, but yeah, I'll get back.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jim, you might want to include SB 82 in there because that's the insurance provision. And there's a few things that have there on the back of my neck raised.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Hall from the City of Haines, I see your hand raised. If you can ask your question, we've got about 2 minutes left.
Just want to know if there's any bills dealing with water allocation, especially in water allocation bills. Is there anything out there dealing with water allocation, especially in Central and Eastern Oregon?
I can take that. So a couple of things, nothing has really changed. Peter, I think you've asked the question before. So Michael continues to work on that subject. It's kind of a bipartisan effort with some of this basin strategies and things of that nature that are going to be moving forward. But if you'd like, I can have Michael get back to you directly.
Thank you.
Okay,
Jim.
yeah, that'd be great if you could keep giving me updates.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the question, Councillor Hall. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I just have a few reminders that are important. I'd like to remind everybody of next week's legislative webinar will also start at 1:30 p.m. instead of the traditional noon time, so please make a note of that. And please remember that the following week, the week of March 20th, there will be no legislative webinar that week. You will have to get your updates from the electronic bulletin that we will release on Friday afternoon. The reason for no webinar that week is because most of the NLC staff, or at least considerable portions of us, will be traveling to Washington, D.C. that day to participate in the National League of Cities Congressional Cities Conference. Registration is open for the LOC Spring Conference. I know that I've mentioned before that this is a conference that has a smaller space, smaller kind of footprint, so to speak. So it's important for people to register early. I know that we have seen heavy registration numbers already. So if you are thinking about registering, time is of the essence. You can find that on our website. Also, this is new and hasn't gotten much advertising, so I want to put it out there. If you have questions about how land use planning works in Oregon, you have planning commission members who don't necessarily have a baseline understanding and are looking for it, or you have new council members who are just trying to step into the complicated world that is land use planning. We are offering a land use planning fundamentals training on Wednesday, March 15th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. It is a virtual training, so you can feel free to Zoom in from anywhere. It is being taught by Alice Cannon. Ms. Cannon has more than 25 years of local government planning experience in Oregon, focusing almost exclusively in both suburban and rural settings. The cost is $79 for a person, but if you register more than 6 persons from the same city, it is a $395 fee. So we've discounted it for groups. And last but not least, we are putting forward presidential regional roundtable meetings. They're happening across the state between now and May. They're being hosted by LOC President and Hillsborough Mayor Steve Calloway. They begin at 11 a.m. At 1 p.m. You can get free lunch if you're interested in attending. Our next meeting is March 15th in Wilsonville. There's one on March 16th in the city of Maupin and March 17th in Central Oregon in Madras. You can find information on those on the LOC's website. And I would note before I sign off, exactly at 2:31 today, Mayor Steve Wright of Seaside says that he hopes to see all of you there in Seaside. So please register for that conference. We will see you next week at 1:30. Thank you for all that you do for your cities and your communities. Know that you are appreciated and respected by your LOC staff. Have a good weekend, everybody.